Welcome to a very special Transmissions podcast interview event. I'm Charles, aka Big C. I'm here with Yusuf, better known as Yoshi. Jeremy, aka Yakko.
Hello.
And Daryl, the Cybertronian Beast.
How you doing? Let's talk Transformers.
All right. And we have a very special guest. There are few creators who have contributed so much to the Transformers franchise, from iconic characters to core elements of the Transformers mythos to epic stories. Simon Furman has had a hand in it all. Not only was he one of the seminal writers on both the original Marvel UK and US comic series, he's been a key contributor to Transformers comics in every iteration, from Marvel to Dreamwave to IDW. He's written Transformer stories for nearly every entertainment medium, from comics to television to video games. It is our profound pleasure to welcome Mr. Simon Furman to Transmissions.
Hey, great to see everyone and lovely to be. Thanks for inviting me on.
It's great to have you. Thanks for joining us.
Pleasure's all mine.
All right, well, let's get right in and start off at the very beginning. So how did you get into writing for the UK Transformers comics back in the 80s?
Well, by luck, I was really just starting out at the time. I'd only written a few stories for a British horror comic called Scream, just junior kind of creepy stories for kids. And, I was just looking for any really script writing opportunities at the time. And I was lucky enough to know Ian Rimmer, who worked at Marvel UK, who in turn introduced me to Sheila Cranner, who was the editor of Transformers UK at the time, which literally was just off the launch pad, maybe a few issues in. And Sheila was looking for original content for the comic, Transformers stories created by UK teams, largely because it had been such a success. And even though the US was going to an ongoing series, the UK comic was already almost caught up with that in terms of what they'd reprinted. And because it was fortnightly at the time, they knew they would need stories to fill the gaps while there was no US material to reprint. And so before I joined, Sheila had approached Steve Parkhouse and John Ridgway, who put together Man of Iron, which turned out to be the first of the UK stories. And at the same time, Sheila handed me a dossier of character profiles and toy pack shots and basically said, come up with some story ideas. And the first one I pitched was The Enemy Within. And thankfully, that was picked up, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Awesome. So you mentioned how your stories kind of weaved in between the U.S. comic, and in the U.S. we were monthly. So back in the 80s, I was reading the Transformers comic, but of course I didn't discover you until much later in the series. And then I in my adulthood, I actually found out about the UK comic and got back into that. But one thing that always interested me was how you were able to weave the UK stories in and out of the US stories. So how far in advance were you able to plan for that? Like, did they give you a lot of issues in advance, or did you have to rewrite some of your stories when the US story kind of went in a different direction that you weren't expecting?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, we were supposed to get upcoming story plots and to know where the US was going with their storyline. But we knew right from the off, really, that may or may not happen and their plans may change. So as much as possible, our stories were designed to fit into gaps. You look at the early stories and they very much leave all the toys exactly where they were at the beginning of the story. So, we couldn't do anything major status quo changing or, kill off characters. We had to be very careful that, if Bob Budiansky wasn't using the Dinobots, we could maybe run a story with them but we then had to leave them in the same status quo as they were last in the American series, in case suddenly they reappeared, which they were prone to do. So really, in a way, it was just make them as self-contained, as self-supportive as possible. But sometimes, we tried a few times just to ease the bump, if you like, between the chunks of UK and the chunks of US. And sometimes we would do little outros to our story that fed back in to the US storyline. There's one where I think we did a little epilogue or coda that had Circuit Breaker in it that fed directly back into the next chunk of US reprints. So we tried as much as we could to make it appear to the reader of the UK comic that there was no US or UK material. It was just one through storyline. But the reality was we had to make ours, and by nature they were just different. There was almost no disguising that the American comics storytelling way was slightly different to that British way of telling comics, which was a little more, I suppose, came out of that 2000 AD, is a little more sort of violent, a little more in your face, maybe a little more tinged with, some social satire in there, all those things. And it was hard to disguise, the difference between, say, Don Perlin and Jeff Senior in terms of art was stark. There was no getting around that. The colouring was different. We had Gina Hart and others hand painting the UK stories onto special paper. So even the colouring looked different. So we couldn't disguise it, but we did what we could to make it as seamless as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for me, it was a revelation discovering all those UK comics much later, because I love the US comic run, but I have to say, in my opinion, the UK comics were a step above or a notch up, and I really enjoyed those. But in
some ways, my sympathies were always with Bob Budiansky, because he was really the guy who had to get the toys into the storyline. So, almost every arc he had to clear the decks, move the next characters in, whereas we had more scope to be, I don't know, I suppose experimental or character driven, and go off on tangents. So it was different for us. We had much more freedom, I guess, and Hasbro UK weren't as maybe as prescriptive in terms of you must get this character into this issue. We had a few of those, and that worked fine for us, but largely we had much more creative freedom.
Okay, yeah. So much later, after about 50 or so issues, Bob Budiansky actually passed the US series over to you as well. So how did that come about?
Well, by then I'd met Bob. I'd been to Marvel US. We corresponded over plots and just keeping up to date with what they were doing. But when I finally got to meet Bob in, I suppose it must have been about 87 or 88, we got on really well, and just on a personal level, Transformers notwithstanding, we really were, we enjoyed each other's company. So we established a rapport and a friendship right from the off, really. And then a year or two later, when Bob came over to the UK, of course, any visiting Marvel US person, we rolled out the welcome wagon, really, and took them out for lunch, showed them around, as much as we were welcomed over at Marvel US offices. And when Bob came over, he and I just went out for lunch, and over lunch in Covent Garden in London, he just said, I'm kind of burned out on the book. He'd been doing it for, best part of 50 issues, and he'd done so much of the setup. And he was just kind of, I'm ready to pass the book over. he felt the book was more or less on its last legs. The sales had dipped. By that point, it was a miracle that it was still going as strong as it was. So he just said, would you like to take over? Strangely, he wasn't the editor on the book. He was only the writer, but he had the authority, I guess, just to offer it to me and then tell editor Don Daly that was the arrangement. So it was all amazingly casual over a beer and a whatever food we ate. But, of course, I was thrilled. Even if it just went 4 issues, it was my foot in the door at Marvel US as far as I was concerned. My account opener there. So I obviously hoped it would go longer than that, but was quite prepared that it may only be 4 issues or 6 issues. And yet that conversation we had and Bob's slight sort of pessimism about the title was somewhat inspirational as well, because there became a sort of vested interest in saying, you know what, I think we can keep it going longer. I think we can give it a shot in the arm, a creative makeover a little bit. I just feel that, Bob had his own sort of way of telling stories, and we had our own way over in the UK. And we just felt that if we injected some of that grandiose space opera, gods and monsters feel that we put into the UK comic, into the US, we might, sustain interest at the very least in the readership we had.
Mm-hmm. Did you wind up getting some of those same restrictions that Bob had in terms of having to introduce new characters and things?
Not so much. We did. There was a certain amount of product that was still current and relevant at the time, and we were happy to include Micromaster. My very first storyline is a glut of Micromasters, really, and that was okay, as some of them were already in the story. But by now, Hasbro were, I think, less focused on Transformers. It was still a toy line that they produced, but they were winding down with that and probably looking in other directions. So we never had quite that same, and the toy lines after that barely came at all. I don't know whether there were many post-Micromasters that had to be in the book. And so we were free largely just to gather some of the characters that had never been in the comic and get those into the storyline. So, yeah, we largely, and Hasbro were always really good with us. Every plot had to be run by them, and they were just generally very supportive, and we didn't have anything vetoed. And, we even got to do a little April Fool's gag with them where we sent them a plot that was so ridiculous. And, they got the joke, and just generally our relationship worked really well. And of course, we managed 25 issues till it finally was over. So it felt a very satisfying amount we got out of that tail end of Transformers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that April Fool's plot?
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't go into detail. I mean, it was so ridiculous. It was all sorts of things like Cup getting amorous with mechanical sheep, and explosives on the Ark that destroys the whole thing. There was a giant cigar-smoking nun fighting Galvatron, and babies in prams getting trod on. We threw everything but the kitchen sink into that joke storyline. And then there was, the worst thing, Rob Tokar and I, Rob was the editor by then, did this, we hoped, firmly tongue-in-cheek and obviously enough that it was a gag. But there was this awful silence from Hasbro after we sent this joke plot in. And we were distinctly worried for our future careers at this point. But luckily, when we sort of gently rattled their cage and they said something like, "We have a few concerns about this storyline," we sort of pointed out that it was dated 1st of April, and then they were just like, and actually from that point on, they loved us and we could do no wrong, because I think everyone has this concept that these corporations have some sort of, they don't get a joke or they don't like to be joked with. But actually, the guys who used to oversee the storylines just thought we were brilliant once we'd done that with them and included them, I guess, in the joke. And really, for the rest of the series, it was very plain sailing with our plots through Hasbro.
Fantastic.
So what is it that keeps you coming back to Transformers? So as you mentioned, Bob Budiansky did get a little burnt out. And since the 80s, he's largely left the franchise behind. He comes back and does conventions and talks about his, the glory days and everything. But you've continually brought new ideas and stories to the franchise, and you keep doing it. So, and we're grateful for that. So what is it that keeps you coming back?
I suppose initially it kept coming back to me, and that was a good thing. But I fully expected, and when I wrote that sort of rather glib "it never ends" at the end on issue 80's letters page, I actually fully expected that was the end. Toys at the time I don't think really came back for encores. So G2 was a surprise to me as much as anybody else. But, was I happy to jump back in? Certainly. It was, I enjoyed myself with G2 immensely. And again, I don't think Hasbro with G2 were so invested that they were going to be all over our storylines. They let us do much what we wanted to do with G2. And so it's been, it keeps coming back. Every time I think I'm finished with Transformers, they pull me back in, as the quote goes. But but it's shaped and defined my whole career, and certainly latterly I'm incredibly grateful for how much it's guided and opened other doors for me, and just generally kept me in work for a career now of 30-something years. So it's always been very, very good to me, Transformers. And nowadays, whenever I get a chance to jump back in with something like Transformers 84 or Transformers Earth Wars, the game I'm working on, I'm more than delighted to do so.
Oh, great. And so since you've been writing comics for a long time, what was it like working with all those Transformers artists? What was the process between the writer and the artist back then? I mean, you've worked with a lot of the artists in the UK, Lee Sullivan, Jeff Senior, Andrew Wildman, and also some of the US artists like Jose Delbo and Derek Yaniger.
Yeah, the process was slightly different between the UK and the US. Marvel US worked what they used to call Marvel plot style, which was you broke the story down in clumps of pages. You might say pages 2 to 4, this amount of stuff happens. And you might suggest some dialogue or some individual panel scenes. But largely you just wrote the storyline, and it was down to the artist to break it down into pages and panels. But in the UK, we worked full script, which meant everything was in there, dialogue, the panel breakdowns, and it allowed you more control. And I suppose the other difference was with the UK artists, we got to know all of them. All of them came into the office to bring in artwork or just socialize. So very quickly, I knew the likes of Jeff Senior and Jeff Anderson and Dan Reed and all these other guys. And it allowed us to almost tailor our scripts. Often with the UK comic, we didn't know, because we were on a weekly schedule, who would be able and available to do which storyline, and which is why often over something like Target 2006 or Legacy of Unicron, you've got 3-4 different artists on it. We didn't have that luxury of knowing we would have an artist for a sustained period of time. So what we used to do was, especially once I was editor on the title as well, was almost gauge the scripts and see which artist we thought they played to the strengths of. So it was much more in control. Whereas I suppose initially with Marvel US, I was just working with Jose Delbo, and that was completely fine. But it was a much more, well, that's the script, off it goes. Jose draws it, and then I lace in the dialogue. But again, once we got Jeff on the book and Andrew on the book, that was so much better because again, I could deal with them. I could talk to them on the phone, chat with them about the stories. Andrew would suggest things, and we allow the story to evolve a little bit. And I guess that's what I never had with, say, Jose, who literally was several stages removed from me in terms of communication. It's not like now, and you can just Skype anybody and just chat to them about the story. Jose was somewhere in America, separated from me by a lot of distance and the Marvel editor's office. So it was slightly more, you sent the script off, you looked at the art, great, I can work with that. But once Andrew and Jeff were involved, it got back to that UK style of, I knew them so well, I could tailor what I was doing and know instinctively they'd get it. Whereas with Jose, we never had more than 4 or 5 issues together, and I'm sure we'd have got that rapport going, but there wasn't really the time for that. So it was great when we got Jeff and Andrew on the book. Suddenly all that was just ticking again in terms of we know how we work, how we think. If somebody doesn't like something, they pick up the phone and say, how about we do it this way? And then with G2, I suppose it was back to that slightly removed way of working. I didn't really have any direct contact with Derek. Rob was doing all the liaising with him and Manny Galen and all those guys. It went back to much more. We would get pages in and, oh, wow, most often, wow, look at that. That's amazing. In fact, often so much better than you imagine yourself as you're writing. So, plot style has a benefit because, after all, the artist is the visual component. So they should be able just to take a plot and break it down. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes you lose that fine control of the panel to panel, the dialogue to image, mirror that's going on. Whereas with full script, I was that much more in control, and that was really the way I learned to do comics.
Okay. So I guess then you probably didn't have much interaction with cover artists either. So like we know that Jim Lee did the cover for that issue 67 that has a really great Galvatron image. And we're just wondering if you ever got to interact with him. But I guess it sounds like you didn't really have much interaction with him.
Not so much at that point. Don Daly was the editor at that time, and Don really was in complete control of the covers. I think maybe we started gradually during that time suggesting covers. I seem to remember suggesting some in that early stage that did or didn't get picked up and used. I think, out of that, you got some great ones like that Jim Lee one the Bill Sienkiewicz one. And, there's no point telling Bill Sienkiewicz how to do a cover. He just does, and it was an amazing thing. So, I was both happy, in the UK, I used to more or less do little sketches of the covers for the artists. We were really bad sketches, I have to say. Just to say, this is more or less what I want you to do, but, run with it if that's not working. But with the US, until Andrew came on the book, and then suddenly we were in the same situation as in the UK, where I could send Andrew a little rough, or I'd talk it through with Rob, and he would send Andrew a little rough of what we're talking about. The the one that I always, from the sort of fused Megatron Ratchet onwards, I was much more involved in the covers. I think that possibly was the first one with he's holding up the note, and
right.
you've got this
Help
sort of,
us.
yeah, that's right. And I remember either talking through or literally breaking those down for Andrew to do. The surrender one. I'm pretty sure I sketched something out badly on that one for Andrew because I had a very clear in my head view of what I wanted that cover to be. And I think pretty much from there to the end of the run, Andrew and I were just talking covers. So I guess I was more involved in that. And, one last little cover story with G2, the Alas Poor Bludgeon cover, I think it's like issue 5 or something. Megatron's holding his head.
Yeah.
Rob, I was in America at the time, and Rob and I were sat in a cafe, or a diner, just talking through the cover idea. And it was one of those. There was a vote for it at the time where you had paper tablecloths and crayons. You could literally draw onto the tabletop, the tablecloth that you were sat at. And as I'm talking about the cover for issue 5, Rob is sat there. Rob, very talented guy, was just sat there sketching it in amazing detail while I was talking. And we kind of tore that section out, and he literally sent that to Derek Yanniger and said, "That's what we want." So, sometimes direct involvement was definitely, and maybe it makes me a bit of a control freak, but I liked that input into the covers. I always found covers to be one of the most important things in a comic book.
Did that little piece of the tablecloth have grease stains on it still too?
It probably did have all sorts of foodstuffs on it as well. What Derek thought of it, I don't know, but yeah, it was great. We just took that section out, and Rob went back to the office and mailed it off.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'd have to explain to my kids that they couldn't just take a picture of it because there were no smartphones back then.
No. All changed. It literally had to be sent.
So we've seen the UK comics get collected in the IDW collections recently. I think there's been 5 or 6 volumes published so far, but we haven't seen everything get collected. And we know in the UK you're getting the G1 definitive collection that has a lot of the UK comics there, but sadly that doesn't reach us over here in North America. Do you think there's any hope of getting a completed collection of the UK comics?
I would absolutely love for IDW to do, and for apart from anything, I love James Roberts' annotations and editorial sort of packaging that goes with those collections. It's really thorough, as you'd expect from James, and I love all that stuff. I think he's done a great job with those. So I'd love to see it happen, and of course, we have those black and white stories from the tail end of the UK run in colour now. John Paul Bove coloured all them up for the definitive G1 collection, which is behind my head at the moment. All our little intersecting spines. I don't know if you can see those.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. All 100 volumes. Sorry?
Yeah, it's just a dream for me to get that on my shelf, unfortunately.
Yeah. It's a big weighty thing for the shelf. It ended up 100 volumes, so
wow.
It's a pretty massive collection. But yeah, John Paul did all sort of brand new, but sympathetic to the time, like he did with 84. He coloured all those little 5 pages. So the good thing is, if IDW do get around to a volume 6 and maybe a volume 7. All those stories will be in glorious full color now.
Awesome. Yeah. So I wanted to I mean, we can't go into your entire Transformers career because we'd be here forever. But I did want to ask you just what you think of how people have taken a lot of the concepts that you introduced and created and expanded them in other Transformers stories. I mean, I think you're responsible for Primus, the Wreckers, the Fallen, the 13, all these things that have become kind of bedrock in Transformers story these days. And you mentioned James Roberts. He's taken a lot of your ideas and taken them a little bit further out in different directions. Nick Roche is another, I think, UK fan turned professional who took a lot of your ideas and expanded on them. What do you think of that? And what do you think of how you've influenced other writers and creators?
Well, I mean, I think it's great. I love it. I love to see particularly things like the Wreckers used and repurposed and restored, I guess. We never had a clue we were building a mythos back then. We were just introducing story elements that seemed to fit the story at the time. And the fact that they've now become part of something bigger, a whole, mythos that underpins almost every iteration of Transformers is very satisfying and very flattering, I guess, that these things, in terms of Hasbro even, are sort of now deemed part of the fabric of Transformers. But, by the same token, it's also great just to see that other creators can come in and just go off on wonderful tangents and add huge new dimensions to these concepts. And rather than just slavishly say, here's the Wreckers, here's Primus, here's this, they do their version of them, their take on them. Everything with the IDW universe was meant to be a new fresh coat of paint on these characters. We didn't want to just do the same thing. Our mission statement almost from the very beginning was, if it's been done one way, don't do it that way again. If a character is this, don't lose that, don't throw it out. But is there a way we can spin that in a different direction, maybe? Give another slant on things. So, everything that creators like Nick and James and John Barber and everybody who's come since is really just following that underpinning idea of taking what was there before, like the Wreckers, and saying, okay, here they are. We're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but this is literally our take on the Wreckers. This is a new take on the Wreckers. It's not exactly the ones And I think that's, healthy for the brand. I think it's really good that things don't just are static and, well, you can't tamper with that. These things are there to be tampered with and given that fresh coat of paint and given a new lease of life, really. And I feel that's largely what the IDW verse has done with things. It's taken what's there, all the stuff that I created, Bob created, the toy makers created, many talented people all contributed, and just, saying, okay, well, that's it. We don't want to get rid of that, but we're going to do it our way, give it a fresh spin. And that's just, I think, why Transformers keeps going. It's not just the same thing rehashed. It's a different take, a different slant.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite bit of Transformers lore that you've contributed that you like, that you're gratified to see pop up now and again?
Yeah, I mean, I love the fact that we brought Unicron into the comic continuity and then gave him the yin to his yang in the shape of Primus, and I love, I grew up reading, apart from the British comics that were available, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby's Fantastic Four or Thor, or and I loved just how kind of bonkers the ideas were. Celestials, Galactus, the Inhumans. Every issue of the Fantastic Four was some mind-blowing, out there concept, cosmic stuff, and really all I tried to do with Transformers was say, look, these are alien beings. There's got to be a whole intergalactic storyline here. there was a little tendency for them to be a bit earthbound. I get that why that was, but I wanted to reintroduce that sense of they had a standing in the universe, that there were literally primal forces at work behind this, and give it that grandeur that Lee and Kirby and many others used to inject into those Marvel comics I loved. So, I love that we got the Primus Unicron thing in there. The Wreckers will always have a big place in my heart, just because what's not to love about them. And there's so much, and I'm always pleased when, like I say, I see something that I've contributed to the brand endure and evolve, and I just feel great. If other people like it enough to want to use it, that's as flattering as it gets.
Awesome. So you could answer the age-old question: Galactus versus Unicron, who wins?
It would be a good one. That my money would be on Galactus.
Depends on who's writing it.
Yeah.
So you've done a lot of work, in all the iterations of Transformers comics, Marvel, Dreamwave to IDW, and you mentioned with IDW you got to create kind of a completely new, fresh take on the Transformers universe. So, how did you compare that experience with what you'd done with Marvel and Dreamwave, where you didn't come in at the genesis, but you had been contributing, but with IDW you got to basically birth a whole new Transformers canon?
Yeah, it was a new thing for me with IDW. I'd always come into something up and running before that. Even the UK stories had one out there before I jumped in. No problem with that. But it was deeply refreshing to be able to say, look, this starts here. There may be stuff we haven't seen yet, but we're building this in blocks from the ground up. And when I put in my initial pitch, Chris Ryle and I chewed it over for a long time to make sure that it was the same but different enough. Like that old movie quote, "Give me the same but different." And I think we wanted to make it recognizable to fans, but make it completely a jumping in point. You don't need to know it. Hopefully you can pick up Infiltration and not know anything about Transformers and just read it, and it builds as you go along and you understand more about it. And that was it. It was that idea that we didn't want to bring a lot of baggage from previous iterations along with us. It had to be it felt like it had to be a fresh start, and it was very liberating for me to start to build our own Transformers universe. So yeah, it's almost unique in as much as that's the first time I've ever got in right at the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it must have been fun to kind of pick and choose what characters you added in, because a lot of before that, a lot of Transformers stories had tended to start off. You always start off with the season 1 and the season 2 characters, and that's it. But really, I got the sense that you said, okay, I've got this entire universe of Transformers characters I can pick from. Okay, yes, the first core group will introduce the season 1 characters, of course, because everyone's familiar with them, but then let's throw in lots of different characters. And I really thought that made the IDW universe very kind of inclusive and expansive.
Yeah, I mean, one of the touchstones we took was the Marvel Ultimate line, which took all those characters kind of back to basics, but remade them a little bit. And that was even the pacing of those stories was something we wanted to kind of include, to make it part of this, that it wasn't just this, issue 1 of Marvel's Transformers comic starts off with double page spreads, more or less, of all the characters just introducing themselves. And we wanted to drip feed characters into the narrative, to hold Optimus Prime back till the very end of Infiltration, to maybe have Megatron only peripherally involved at first. And just, that perspective thing of having the thing expand in front of the eyes of the humans involved. In terms of the first Transformers we meet are Ratchet and Runabout and Runamuck, maybe Thundercracker, I think, or Skywalk. But they're not sort of key players. We don't actually see a transformation until issue 2 or the end of issue 1. It just, we wanted to avoid doing the way it's done before and bring in that slow burn. Maybe a little too slow, because I think at first the feedback IDW were getting, of course, we were in the internet age, so it was happening as we were putting Infiltration out. That idea that I think readers were maybe getting antsy for some full-on robot action, which is when we devised and commissioned Stormbringer. So almost we were responding immediately to the kind of feedback we were getting on Infiltration. And it's like, well, okay, let's do the Cybertron storyline, and that you can have robots aplenty in that. And meanwhile, we can continue this slower curve in Infiltration escalation, and then the Spotlights came into the mix. So it was very much an evolving continuity. We were responsive, I think, to the way it was being perceived. And so suddenly you had Stormbringer, suddenly you had the Spotlights, and everything then felt like we could take our time on the core series.
I think that did help the universe feel a lot like lived in as well. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, and we wanted, some people don't like kind of humans in Transformers, or they'd rather just have the robots. But we really wanted, I don't think you get the awe aspect of the robots unless you're looking up at it, literally, like Verity does when she encounters Megatron. And you're getting that sense of gasp and look up. So we very much wanted it to be a human-centric first arc, and for you to care a bit about those characters. And talking about subsequent writers picking up, I was always very pleased when Nick or James would bring back Verity into the storyline, because I had a definite soft spot for that character as we went along with the original series.
Yeah. So it's no secret that Grimlock has been a favorite character of yours, the Dinobot leader. You've used him a lot throughout many of the iterations of Transformers. So what keeps bringing you back to his character? What do you find compelling about his story arc?
I think he appeals to me in that he's that shaded character. He's not necessarily all good. He's not necessarily a bad guy. But I've always liked the more conflicted, the less, I always find the archetypes, even Optimus Prime, as somewhat limiting in as much as you can't go too far wrong with them. A lot of people didn't like my shading of Optimus Prime in the Transformers 84 0 issue. But and you've got to be careful with those archetypes a little bit. But with Grimlock, he's that perfect character who could go one way, could go the other way. He's a little bit gruff and unsympathetic. And I think the trick with those characters is to make people like them nevertheless. And he's just, I like irascible, difficult characters. They give you so much more meat as a writer. And again, Megatron, to a certain extent, is Megatron. Optimus Prime is Optimus Prime. But in the middle ground, you've got some of the more interesting characters, like the sort of the Wreckers, like Grimlock, who, you're in a war. Wars are dirty on both sides. You can't kind of keep your hands clean. And I like that realism that you can get from characters like that, where they're forced into difficult decisions. It's not always the right decision. And it just, story-wise, it's just, there's more to grab hold of there.
Mm-hmm.
Also, he turns into a T-Rex. What's not to like?
I know you probably haven't really directly worked with him, but just recently, Greg Berger was inducted into the Hall of Fame, the Transformers Hall of Fame, as the voice of Grimlock in the TV show, of course. But I just want to mention that, even though it's been different mediums, but Grimlock has been a favorite character for a lot of fans, both in the visual, in the the cartoon medium, and also in the comics. So and they do have some slightly different portrayals, but I think both of them are really exciting and interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice. There's room for various interpretations of Grimlock. And, I mean, I love Greg to bits. He's such a lovely guy. And I think it's wonderful they've got him into the Hall of Fame, where he definitely belongs. And, I still get a thrill. I mean, I for the UK conventions, I used to write a lot of the sort of audio plays they would put on in the evening. And I met Greg at a few of those and some of the US cons. And just having Greg do lines I've written live on stage is a particular thrill, really amazing. And, I've been lucky enough to have these amazing voice actors literally there live doing sort of a me Grimlock, or, Scott McNeil doing Waspinator lines, fabulous. Just, it's great fun.
So let's talk a little bit more about Transformers 84. So you mentioned Optimus Prime. I did want to, maybe I'll use that to segue into one of the questions I had about Optimus Prime. So you mentioned the little bit of shading you gave to him and his decision to sacrifice the Ark. The expanded backstory that comes up in Transformers 84 makes his sacrifice, at least, of course, this is given hindsight of 4 million years later, but it does make it seem a little bit more foolhardy than noble. That, he basically sacrifices himself and all his closest friends to at a chance to get rid of Megatron, not realizing that there are other Decepticons that are maybe just as bad or even worse. And he puts Cybertron in a worse position. Do you see Optimus Prime's kind of urge for self-sacrifice as maybe a character flaw, like a core character flaw that he has to deal with?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think he makes the decision he makes in issue 0 for all the right reasons, he thinks. I think he really is thinking we're in an impossible situation. There's only one thing to do here. And he gets it wrong. And, that's what I love, is that a lot of then everything that rolls out from that is effectively he makes a bad decision for the right reasons, or so he believes. And then everything is effectively him making that right, or trying to make that right. The fact that we then they wake up on Earth and he's endangered a whole load of innocent alien life forms to him. It just, to me, adds the fact that he makes a mistake and is continually trying to put that right or atone for it, gives the character far more depth than just saying he's this great guy and he always gets it right. And I really wanted to say that, not that I don't want to undermine the character, but that everything afterwards is, I need to sort of put this right. I need to stop this escalating. I need to make right what I've done. And to carry that burden around is, what often great men do, especially in a war situation. It's very hard to get all the decisions right. And I just felt it gave every sort of subsequent action from Optimus Prime a slightly different slant, that he's always carried around this nugget of having set all these balls in motion that really could have been avoided with a different decision. So, when he later subsequently sacrifices himself, it's maybe more understandable that if I'm just making this matter worse, maybe it's better to remove myself from this. So maybe it just explains some of the sort of later sacrifices. I'm still not totally certain about sacrificing yourself in a computer game, but that story is what it is, But but still underlying that, I wanted something that said, this speaks to why he is like he is.
Mhm. So in general, we were surprised last year to get Transformers 84 and coming back to the early 80s Marvel comics. So what was the genesis of coming back to this backstory? I mean, we had Regeneration 1 a few years ago that wrapped up the old Marvel series, taking us up to 100. So what got you back? What pulled you back in this time to get you back into the 80s?
It was IDW just came to me. It was the 35th anniversary. Is that right? Yes, 35th anniversary.
Yes,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And basically, they wanted something. It was only ever meant to be a one-shot. That we got the limited series is great, but it was just meant to be an anniversary thing. And they thought, and I agreed, that the best way to do that, well, initially it started off, the first idea was to do a prequel to the original series, almost, literally like an issue 0 to the original run. But to me, that was limiting because they're a piece. An awful lot happens in those first 4 or 5 pages. But ostensibly, before issue 1, they're all at peace. There might be Megatron plotting in the background, but they didn't feel there was enough story there. Having said that, I see now Brian Ruckley come on to the new ongoing and do a brilliant, pre-Civil War storyline. But I kind of felt we were limited to what we could do with it. So at that point, I counter-suggested that we did this storyline that loops in and out of what we know, because there felt like there were big enough gaps there to fill. And then subsequently, I got the idea of looping in Man of Iron as, well, we got the first UK story as well, but to fill in some blanks with that maybe and make it more canon. It always felt like a little bit of a standalone story, Man of Iron. And so I really wanted to put it back into that. This, it had been reprinted. It was one of the few UK stories that Marvel US reprinted in its run. So it felt like the perfect one to pull back in and say, no, this really happened, and this is the truth of it again. So, while it took a couple of liberties, I really think it gave us a chance to say it was rather than just 2 robots in a spacecraft, it's these 2 robots in a spacecraft for a reason, and that is itself connected to the main storyline in 84. So yeah, it was always meant to be just a one-shot. Never thought we'd get a chance to do more. So when IDW came back and said, can we do a 4-issue series? I already had a stack of ideas and, again, more gaps I felt could be filled or touched upon. So, it's evolved from there, and, I would dearly love to do more. And, I hope it's done well enough for IDW that, there's scope, because I believe there's enough story out there for maybe another 4-issue series down the line.
When you had that initial conversation, was the plan to see if you could also get Andrew and Jeff back together?
No, I don't think that was ever really on the cards. I think right from the start, IDW had an idea that Guido would be the right artist for it. And, I think they're completely right, because when we used Guido on Regeneration 1, he was able almost seamlessly to drop into a run that Andrew had been drawing and not exactly draw in Andrew's style, but not a million miles dissimilar either. He's a real chameleon of an artist. And he was able to do stuff that you would have looked at and said, well, that's Guido. And yet the flow didn't really jar between Andrew's issues and Guido's.
The word I use for Guido is respectful. He's very respectful of who came before him.
He is, but he's also very good at kind of subsuming his own style and making it work. And so I think right from the start, he was he was the first choice for 84, just because we'd seen IDW, myself, had seen what he could do with Regeneration 1. And what's amazing with Guido's work on 84, I think, is that it is amazingly like the original Marvel comics, and yet nothing like them. Obviously, there's everything he does, from poses to angles to certain shots. He chooses very carefully. So he's still drawing as Guido, but you're almost conned into thinking you're looking at something older, something from that Marvel run. And then on top of that, you have JP's amazing colors, which mimic the old coloring system. And so you just get almost completely sucked into this idea that it's a very modern looking comic, and yet it has that complete feel of those original stories as well.
Sorry, Charles, I had to ask.
No, it's fine. Everyone can ask a question. That's fine. No, I mean that, and some of these are your questions, Yoshi, so that's okay. But yeah, I mean, just in general, how is it working with artists like Guido, with John Paul Bove? I mean, these days in the digital age, I imagine it's much easier to communicate, to share pages and things. Like in the 80s, was everything basically via mail, where you'd mail stuff off, wait a couple of weeks and get a response back, and now everything's pretty much instant?
Yeah, it was back in the day, it was fax machines and yes, the post service or courier. Most artwork landed in the Marvel UK offices, either sent riskily through the Royal Mail, or were brought in by the artists. A lot of the artists, even if they weren't London based, would make trips down with the artwork they were bringing excuse me, rather than go and risk it sort of disappearing en route. So yeah, it's, of course, nowadays you can see breakdowns and discuss and do revisions, and even once you get to finished pages, we can have tweaks and changes. So of course it's, in theory, much more foolproof. But of course stuff still creeps through. We missed completely with issue 2 that we'd drawn a scene, or Guido had drawn a scene with Impactor in it, and Sandstorm and Springer, and the Wreckers he's not supposed to know at this point in terms of the UK storyline that followed. But we sort of missed that. We got the Wreckers right, but we missed in that scene that the characters who shouldn't have been together were together. So, you can't catch everything. But yeah, it's much, much better now.
Mm-hmm. So one thing that I appreciated, of course, is being a fan of the old Marvel comics and having read all the issues, I saw a lot of deep cuts in in Transformers 84. Things like, oh yeah, this connects to this and this and this, and particularly Thunderwing, seeing Thunderwing and Scorponok show up, seeing references to Straxus and the smelting pool and everything. So how do you balance putting all those deep cut references in from the Marvel Comics lore, but still keeping the stories relatively self-contained for casual readers?
Yeah, I mean, I think you just have to be aware that not to include things that will baffle people. So, if you're going to put Straxus in and have a throwaway line about a smelting pool, people will get that who know the storylines, but to others, it doesn't really matter that much. They're going to see the smelting pool happen in an issue's time, so they'll get what a smelting pool is. It's just all the time you have to have kind of two eyes on it. The fans, the people who know the original stories. So you're layering in stuff, you're joining dots, you're including, real sort of touchstones from those issues. But on the other hand, you've got to look at it and go, is this still telling a story that you can just jump in and read? So, it's that thing of Easter eggs. They're there, but they kind of, if you put Easter eggs in and they're baffling to the readers, you've just got to be aware that that's a no-no, or, use that very sparingly. So I think I've always tried with 84 to make it as first-time reader, if there's such a thing of Transformers comics these days, as possible. And certainly you can't, it may well be picked up by somebody who's read the IDW continuity but never read the Marvel the comics. So it's lovely to have the commentary in the back so you can flag up all these things, but it just can't be a kind of essential thing in the story. It can't only be accessible to the people who know. So it's a fine balancing act. I hope I've got it right with 84. But yeah, you've just got to have those two pairs of eyes on it all the time.
Right. So you made Punch / Counterpunch the core point of view character in Transformers 84. Do you plan to explore some of the guilt and divided loyalty that he has as a result of his actions? I mean, we've seen him, he is clearly, his Autobot sympathies direct him to do what's right. He takes the information back to Ultra Magnus, but he stands by while Straxus is executing lots of Autobots in the smelting pool. And of course he doesn't say anything because he's Counterpunch and he can't give himself away. But I imagine that creates a lot of internal conflict for him.
Yeah, it does. And, I'd never used this character before. I say that, but possibly he was in a UK story, but I never used him in any great extent. And once I did, I just found him a completely fascinating character. And this idea that when he switches from one to the other, it's not like he's Punch all the time in a different set of armor. He's very much a different character when he's Counterpunch. And, it's a kind of split personality. It's the dark half. It's all those interesting psychological things. And I thought immediately I kind of love this character because, it's that thing, again, I was talking with Grimlock, of the ones who walk that fine line and could go either way are more interesting as characters, and you never quite know what to expect. And is he Punch? Is he Counterpunch? It's something I'd really like to, again, if we do more 84, to explore more of. He's very much, to an extent, the narrator in this mini series and the issue 0. But I figure if we go on with him, I'd like to make him much more of a part of the action as well. I mean, there's a little bit of that in 84, but I'd like to get more inside his head or heads as if we get a chance to do more of that. He's a great character.
Yeah. I think this is actually the first time he's been written like that. I think usually he is just an Autobot in disguise as a Decepticon.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that's fine, but I always look to see whether there's something more you can do with a character, something a little different. And again, it comes, I think, from that IDW experience of, okay, there's Ultra Magnus. Can we do him in a little way? Not, sort of trash anything that's come before, but is there a little twist on his character every time? And I suppose that's just what fascinates me about storytelling and character-driven stuff is to take those characters you think and twist them one way or the other and turn things on their head and hopefully confound expectations.
Yeah. So you mentioned if you get the chance to get do more with Transformers 84. So what can we do as fans? I mean, is it just encourage everyone to buy as many copies as possible and make sure people buy the trade paperback and everything?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, while I would love to say it's all to do with IDW loving to employ me, I have a feeling it's probably also down to this thing performing well enough as a comic in its own right and then a collected edition. So, I think the issue 0 did well. As far as I know, 84 is doing well as a limited series. But yeah, it's just, we've had great reviews from you guys. Thank you very much. And lots of other online sources. So I think there's a critical mass here that says we've pleased people. You can't please everybody, but I think we've pleased a lot of the sort of fans, even some of the diehards out there. And I think, sales in the end is, if it does well enough for IDW, there's every chance that we might do another one.
Great. Maybe we'll even get up to issue 80 in a 4-issue limited series.
Yes, that would be great. I'd be fine with that.
So, you've worked on more than just Transformers. I wanted to also ask you about the comic you're doing with Jeff Sr., To the Death. Maybe you could tell folks who haven't heard of that or gotten a chance to check that out, what that's about.
Yeah, we a while back, Jeff and I had talked about doing something together again, creator-owned. Jeff largely now works in advertising, doing storyboards and animatics. Apart from anything, I think it pays a lot better than comics work, but hey. But I think he was also just feeling that need to kind of create and go wild and do something that wasn't, a guy walking along or drinking a can of Coke or something else. I think he was just feeling a little bit bottled up. And so we just said, look, let's tap into some of the things we've done before. We did a series called Dragon's Claws back in the 80s. And, of course, Death's Head. And that had that kind of sci-fi, slightly, sort of acerbic humor, just sort of that edge that a lot of British comics like 2000 AD brought to their storytelling. And we thought, well, let's channel some of that energy from those series, which, still thankfully are reprinted and out there. But we wanted to do something that was ours, that was different. And so it's very much channeling those series we did for Marvel UK, but creating something completely new. It's a big sci-fi conspiracy thriller set in the future on a dystopian world that's being, literally ground down to extinction by huge corporations, and kind of one man against the system, but with a backdrop of war on other worlds and war as mass entertainment. So, hopefully it's got a sort of a current satirical, cynical look at the world in it. But, it was a chance to cut loose. It's got a alien soldier of fortune style character called Killer Toa, who's kind of our Death's Head. So we took our sort of greatest hits, I guess. There's a few mechs in there. So, we just bundled everything into this, what turned into a 10-issue maxi series. And yeah, it's all out there now. And, it's available on Comixology in digital form. Here in the UK, it's available in print and slipcased editions. So yeah, it was a mammoth undertaking, but we're really pleased with it, and lovely to have something that we did ourselves and published ourselves. And we had some help from a company called Get My Comics, who acted as our publisher distributor, and it involved us literally getting on the phone to comic shops and asking them to stock it. So it was a great fun experience, and very pleased with it now, sort of sitting in its slipcase sets.
Awesome. So people can find that. I think it's with tothedeath.com, right? to-the-death.com. That's
it. Yeah. And like I say, it's available on Comixology, so you can read it in digital format if you want, or, if you can stand a bit of sort of postage costs, Get My Comics do ship to the US and worldwide. So it is there if anybody wants to have a look. It's kind of Jeff and I doing what we do.
So, I mean, since you were working for Marvel UK at the time of writing Transformers, you created some original characters like Death's Head, you mentioned. Also, I remember the Neo Knights. Those were a latter day in Transformers, the first kind of superhero / mutant group introduced into Transformers. And I know there were plans or thoughts of doing a series about them. Would you ever go back to them if Marvel / Disney ever had ever gave you the opportunity?
I'd like to do something with the Neo Knights, and there's nothing to say we couldn't do some kind of Transformers 84-esque reappearance of them if we ever got that far with it. I'd love to. I think there might be problems using Circuit Breaker now, but I'm sure we could work around that. I don't know how easy or difficult it would be to use those characters without a kind of Marvel stamp on them. So, but never say never on these things. And I really enjoyed doing those issues and bringing those characters into the mix. So who knows? Love to if we get a chance.
So, do you have anything coming up in the future that you're interested to talk about, or anything we can plug, or any future comic works that you've got coming out soon?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a few things at the moment. I mean, I'm heavily involved in Transformers Earth Wars, which is a mobile game. I don't think it's just over here. I think it's generally available. And that is a kind of ongoing thing, really. That started 4 or so years ago, and I still supply the saga storylines for that and dialogues for when they bring in new characters. So that's been an amazingly evolving thing that, we got to debut the Dinobot Combiner in Earth Wars, and we brought in 2 original characters, Sentius Magnus and Sentius Malus, who are unique to the game, which was very cool, all done with, Hasbro's designers. So it's been a great fun job. I'm doing a comic version of a 90s arcade game called Battletoads at the moment, which is making a comeback as a game, and there's a comic to go along with that. I'm doing a few more sort of self-published things, and just generally, it's just keeping busy really, and I'm always hopeful that we'll get to do some more Transformers 84.
Cool. I do notice you're wearing the Wreck and Rule shirt. I think that was
Here we go.
our friend of the show, Lady Wreck, was producing those shirts a little while
ago. That's right. Yeah, generally, if I knew she was coming over to a Transformers UK convention, I'd always ask if I can have a sort of refresher of the shirt because they wear out.
Yeah.
But fabulous. And Lady Wreck actually had a McAdams T-shirt with her last time she was over, so I picked up one of those too.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. I think that's we've got all the questions. Well, there's lots more questions we could ask, but I think we've kept you long enough. But we do want to end the interview. With all our guests, we go through a set of rapid fire questions. So if you can indulge us just a few more minutes, we can. These are real quick, either or, yes, no questions. We'll run through.
Sure. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. So we'll start off. They get. I think they get progressively more detailed, but the first one is pretty easy. Autobot or Decepticon?
Decepticon.
Oh, who is your favorite Decepticon?
Galvatron, but maybe Bludgeon, maybe Thunderwing.
Okay. Fair enough.
Although I'm also developing a big like for Straxus the more I use him in 84.
You know about Straxus, right, Charles?
Yes, Yoshi. I know about Straxus. Transformers live action movie, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or Bumblebee?
The first one, the first live action movie. I love Bumblebee as well, but sheer wow factor of seeing it on the big screen with digital transformations, I loved, and I still think the first movie is a great fun popcorn movie. So yeah, probably the first of the Bayverse ones.
Okay. So this one, I'm gonna tailor this to you a little bit because we usually ask about what your favorite comic series is, but I think I'll tweak it slightly and say, what is the I guess favorite comic issue, story arc, whatever that you haven't worked on?
That's a good question. I mean, just as a whole, I've really enjoyed James's More Than Meets the Eye. I think his issues are beyond packed, and there's so much in every issue. I just kind of love what he does with it. Wow, that's a difficult one. Favorite? I mean, are we limiting it to Transformers or?
Yeah, for this question,
Yeah.
yes, we'll limit it to Transformers.
Okay, favorite story. Wow, that's a tough one. I really like some of the tangential ones. So I really liked Hearts of Steel. I really thought that was great fun. And I really liked the Dreamwave G.I. Joe Transformers one that Jay Lee drew, the sort of kind of Second World War based one. I kind of like the sort of almost what if ones.
Cool. All right. Third party toys, yes or no?
Yes. Is that the right answer?
Okay.
I don't know. The funny thing is, I'm not a big toy collector. I have a few, characters that I've got a Masterpiece Grimlock up there somewhere and so on. But yes, I suppose so. Unless Hasbro are going to get upset about my saying that, then it's a definite no.
Cats or dogs?
Cats. We have a cat. I've always been more cats.
Cool. Coffee or tea?
Both, but first thing in the morning, coffee.
Chicken or steak?
Steak. But it's got to be a good steak.
Oh, okay. Not a McDonald's steak.
No. A bad steak is just to be avoided, but yeah, a really good steak.
Pepsi or Coke?
Coke.
Burger King or McDonald's or whatever fast food place you prefer?
Yeah, I'm not a big fan on either, but often in the States, because we don't have them here, I will track down a Wendy's if I can when I'm over. So I do like their burgers particularly.
Okay. History or science?
History.
If you play video games, Xbox, PlayStation, or Switch?
Yeah, I don't really. I shouldn't admit that, saying I write for Earth Wars and I'm writing a Battletoads game and things like that, but I'm not a big gamer, so I'll do a slight pass on that one.
A PC or Mac?
Mac.
iPhone or Android?
iPhone.
Is there a favorite phone app that you can't live without?
It sounds terribly British, this, but it would be the weather app, I think.
Fair enough. Marvel or DC?
Marvel. I was born and raised on Marvel, and I never really got into DC in the same way. I think, I used to love Stan Lee's interconnected universe thing so much.
Yeah. Is there a favorite Marvel character?
Spider-Man. That was always my character. The one I loved pretty much above all others.
Stallone or Schwarzenegger?
Schwarzenegger. I think Schwarzenegger's got a dash of knowing humor about his, lack of acting, if you like.
Pixar or DreamWorks?
Pixar.
Is there a guilty pleasure movie that you'll watch whenever it comes on, whenever you see it?
Yeah, well, there's a few of those probably, but possibly the biggest guilty pleasure movie is American Werewolf in London, closely followed by Walter Hill's The Warriors,
nice,
which I adore.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
Star Trek.
Good man. Simpsons, Family Guy, or Rick and Morty?
Simpsons.
Walking Dead or Game of Thrones?
Game of Thrones. I love the comic of Walking Dead, but after a while with the TV show, I couldn't quite kind of sustain my interest. But Game of Thrones, I watched right to the very end.
Cool. Okay, sports. So these are kind of U.S. centric sports, but we'll add in a British one for you as well. So NFL, MLB, NHL, UFC, NBA, or Premier League?
Premier League.
Yeah.
I've been to some baseball games and some football games when I'm over, but no, it's hard for me to like anything other than soccer much over there.
Porsche, Ferrari, Lamborghini, or a VW Beetle?
Is it tactful to say VW Beetle? No, it would probably be a Lamborghini, I think, of those.
All right, last question. Blonde, brunette, or redhead?
It has to be brunette. My wife might see this.
All right. So I think, you survived the gauntlet of our rapid fire questions. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with us.
Well, thanks for inviting me, guys. It's been a pleasure. And, I've loved listening to the podcast. So thanks a lot for all the kind words on 84.
Oh, thank you. And thanks so much for continuing to listen. We appreciate it. It's always great to know. I mean, seriously, you're one of my heroes. I mean, one of the people I grew up with on Transformers. And since you've kept coming back to Transformers over 35 years, there's been so much that I've really enjoyed, that you've worked on, that I've enjoyed reading and watching. So thank you so much for everything you've done for this franchise and everything you've contributed and just making Transformers what it is today.
Thanks very much. It's much appreciated. And, it's you guys who have kept me in a job for all these years. So thank you.
Well, we hope you'll keep on going. And in particular, more Transformers 84, but just more Transformers in general. So yeah, thanks.
Definitely works for me. It never ends, as I'm fond of saying.
So where can people find you on the internet, on social media?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter and otherwise, you can also find To the Death on Facebook and Twitter. We're always keeping an eye on that. So just generally reach out. There's a Regeneration 1 Facebook page where we just field any general Transformers questions and queries. So I'm out there if you want to send me some questions.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for listening and watching to our interview with Mr. Simon Furman. This is from the Transmissions Podcast. You can find us at transmissionspodcast.com. We do lots of different podcasts. We do 2 shows every week. We do a toy show all about Transformers toys and merchandise. And we do a Transformers media show, Transmissions Alt Mode, every Friday, where we talk all about Transformers comics and media. And we review a lot of Transformers comics, of which Transformers 84 is one of them. And we are looking forward to the final issue of Transformers 84 that should be coming very soon.
No. We want a lot more. What the fuck are you talking about? We want a lot more.
The final issue in this series, not the final issue forever. But that should be out. It might already be out by the time you're watching this. But also check out the trade paperback, which collects issues 0 and 1 through 4. That should be out in a month or two's time. It should be available very soon.
Yeah, I think actually as well, in November, there's a one-shot that collects the issue 0 issue, if you missed that, and the original stories. So issue 1 of Marvel US and Man of Iron. I think that's out in November for IDW.
Great. Cool. Okay. So be on the lookout for that as well.
Brilliant. Well, thank you, guys.
All right. Thanks, everyone. And we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Later.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Transmissions. But just because this episode is over doesn't mean the Transformers fun has to stop. Join us and other Transformers fans on our Discord chat server by visiting transmissionspodcast.com/discord. If you would like to learn more about how you could support the Transmissions Podcast, just visit transmissionspodcast.com/support. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you again next week.